The median 401k balance in this country right now is $38,176. That's not a number for people who did everything wrong. That's the midpoint. Half of all active 401k participants, according to Vanguard's 2025 How America Saves report, have less than that. And below them is the group nobody talks about, the 54% of American households with zero dedicated retirement savings. Nothing at all, per the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. Meanwhile, 58% of American workers told Bankrate in 2025 that they feel behind on retirement. But if you have nothing, you can't be behind. You're just absent from the game entirely, which tells you something important about the nature of the anxiety spreading through this entire demographic. People aren't measuring themselves against the real world. They're measuring themselves against a carefully curated fantasy. And if you are watching this video, there is a statistically meaningful chance the actual scoreboard, the real distribution of retirement wealth in America, shows you in a radically better position than you currently believe. Here are 5 specific data-backed signs that you're already in the top 10%, not the top half, the top 10, without knowing it. And before sign 1, you need to understand one structural concept, because it changes every comparison you've ever made about your retirement. And once you see it, you'll spend about 30 seconds being angry at financial media, and then you'll start making better decisions. Here's the problem. Human beings evaluate their financial situation by comparing it to their reference group, the visible, salient examples of wealth in their environment. If you consume financial content regularly, your reference group skews up dramatically. You're marinating in early retirement bloggers, financial independence case studies, and people who describe $250,000 in investable assets as a starting point for a serious conversation. Your brain absorbs all of it as the baseline. It isn't. The actual baseline is published by the Federal Reserve, not estimated, not anecdotally assembled, formally published, using data from one of the most comprehensive wealth surveys in the world. And the baseline looks nothing like the content ecosystem you're living in. I call this the invisible scoreboard. There's a guy, this is a real type of person, a composite I've encountered in some form dozens of times. Let's call him Paul. Paul is 48 years old. He has a solid job in middle management, saves about 11% of his salary, has $190,000 in a Vanguard target date fund, and owns a house with decent equity. Every quarter, Paul reads a personal finance article about someone who retired at 42 with a $2 million portfolio, and he comes away feeling like a financial failure. He's not looking at the invisible scoreboard. He's looking at the highlight reel. The highlight reel says he's behind. The invisible scoreboard says something very different. The actual numbers, the average American family retirement savings is $333,940. The median, the midpoint of the actual distribution, is $87,000. That 4-to-1 gap between average and median is the signature of a heavily right-skewed distribution. A small number of people with very large accounts are pulling the average far above where most Americans actually sit. If your balance is $200,000 and you feel behind, check the scoreboard. You're in the top third already, on balance alone, before we even start looking at behavior. The invisible scoreboard exists. It has numbers. Nobody forces you to look at it. But if you do, sign 1 is immediately obvious. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you about the silent retirement killer that costs the average investor more than any market crash ever has. But first, sign 1. Sign 1. You have a dedicated retirement account of any kind. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, 54% of American households report having no dedicated retirement savings. And according to a Gallup poll conducted in April 2025, roughly 4 in 10 American adults have no money in any retirement savings plan. No 401k, no IRA, no 403b, nothing. Among adults with household incomes below $50,000 per year, that number climbs to 72% with no retirement savings plan at all. If you have $1 in a retirement account, you have already passed the filter that eliminates the majority of American households. You are not behind. You are in the part of the distribution that saves at all. But here's the thing, the balance-focused narrative misses entirely. The account itself isn't the achievement. The behavioral architecture that built the account and kept it open is the achievement. And that architecture has three components, which I'll call the three levers, that are in your direct control and account for the vast majority of long-term outcome variation. They are time, rate, and fees. Not stock picks, not market timing, not a proprietary allocation methodology. Time, rate, and fees. Time is self-explanatory. The earlier you start the clock, the longer compound growth runs. Rate is your savings rate, the percentage of income going into the account. Fees are what the account costs to maintain. Two of these three levers, rate and fees, are entirely under your control right now. Time is partially under your control through the decision to keep contributing even when you're tempted not to. The compounding math on time is genuinely brutal if you look at it directly. A person who starts contributing $500 per month at age 30 earns a 7% average annual return and never touches the account, has approximately $1,263,000 at 65. A person who starts at 32, same contribution, same return, has roughly $1,048,000. 2 years difference in start time, $215,000 in final balance. The clock doesn't care about your intentions. It runs or it doesn't. There's also this layer that most balance comparisons skip entirely. A meaningful portion of people who appear to have accounts are not actually building wealth in those accounts. They're enrolled, getting the match, contributing at the 3% default, and mentally treating it as covered. According to the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, the typical auto-enrollment default contribution rate at most companies is 3%. 3% of a $55,000 salary is $1,650 per year. After employer match, call it $3,000. That's not wealth building at the level that produces top 10% outcomes. That's the ritual of participation without the substance of it. If you're contributing above 10% closer to what Fidelity and Vanguard's research suggests as the 15% target, including match, you are already 2 behavioral categories above the vast majority of account holders. You have the account, you have the rate, and you've done the thing most people think counts without actually doing. The invisible scoreboard reflects this. Check it. Sign 2 connects to something behavioral economists call hyperbolic discounting, the human tendency to value present consumption so heavily that we systematically underweight the future. And it shows up in retirement data in a way that's more damaging than almost any other single factor. Because sign 2 is this: you have never made a penalized early withdrawal. 13% of Americans between the ages of 25 and 55 make a penalized early withdrawal from their retirement accounts every single year, according to research cited by the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And one analysis found that total early withdrawals in a year equaled almost a quarter of all deposits flowing into retirement accounts that same year. For every $4 going in, nearly $1 was being siphoned back out in early withdrawals, taxes, and penalties. Let me give you a number with a full weight of compound math behind it. You're 40 years old. You pull $30,000 out of your 401k for an emergency. The 10% federal penalty costs you $3,000 immediately. Income tax at 22% on the 27 remaining thousand costs you roughly $5,940 more. You net about $21,060 on a $30,000 withdrawal. You've already lost 30%. But that's still not the real loss. At 7% average annual return over 25 years, that $30,000 would have grown to approximately $163,000. You didn't lose $30,000, you lost $163,000 for a crisis that probably cost less than $30,000 to resolve in the first place. The people who've never done this, who've survived the job loss, the divorce, the medical emergency, the burst pipe in January without touching the retirement account, have something invisible in their balance sheet. The discipline has a dollar value. It's just deferred. It compounds forward, silently, in the background of a life that never felt particularly wealthy in the moment. And here's the thing about this stat that most people miss. The 13% who take a penalty withdrawal every year aren't predominantly reckless. They're the people who didn't have a separate emergency fund. The people who were told, implicitly or explicitly, that the 401k was their safety net. They had the account, but not the full behavioral architecture. If you have a separate emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses in liquid savings, and the 401k is a sealed vault in your mind, you've already eliminated the most common exit from long-term compounding that exists in the American retirement system. Check the actual scoreboard. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content, otherwise YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. I try to keep everything grounded in actual data rather than vibes and hope, which is apparently still a differentiator. Let me introduce someone I'm calling Mark. Mid-50s, $240,000 in a rollover IRA and a current 401k combined. Contributes 12% including employer match. Owns a house with meaningful equity. Never touched his retirement account during 2008, 2020, or 2022. His funds carry an expense ratio under 0.2%. And every month when he logs in, he feels a low-grade dread that he's not doing enough, that other people his age are further ahead, that he should have started sooner, done more, made smarter moves. I'm coming back to Mark in detail later. Hold him in mind. Here's the part that almost never makes it into a retirement calculator, but it probably should. I built a digital book called The Exit Code. It's an analysis of 50 years of retirement data distilled into a mathematical framework for turning someday into a specific date. The part most retirement calculators leave out entirely is what I call the invisible bill, a healthcare cost gap that hits people who retire before 65, before Medicare eligibility, that can run as high as $14,000 per year per person. Most standard planning tools don't model this at all. I also built out the dynamic withdrawal method, a framework that replaces the 4% rule for people who want a system that actually adjusts for sequence of returns risk and real market conditions, rather than assuming a straight-line glide path invented in a 1990s academic paper. Knowing the data is one thing. Having a system that turns the data into a specific action plan is a different thing entirely. The Exit Code is available for less than a dinner out through the link in the description. Every year you wait to build the system is a year compounding works against you rather than for you. Sign 3. You think volatility is what destroys retirement accounts. It isn't. Fees are. This is the reversal that catches even financially literate people flat-footed. Market crashes are dramatic, visceral, newsworthy. They produce emotional responses. They cause people to log into their accounts at midnight and call their broker at 9 in the morning. But the data on long-term outcomes tells a surprisingly calm story about volatility. Fidelity's own research found that a person who started with $100,000 in 2022 stayed invested through the drawdowns, kept contributing, and rebalanced annually ended up with $191,463 by the end of 2025. A person who panicked, completely liquidated their equities, and stopped contributing ended with about $105,586. The cost of panic? Roughly $86,000. Real, painful, recoverable with time. Now look at fees. On a $500,000 portfolio, the difference between a 0.1% expense ratio entirely achievable with a standard index fund at Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, and a 1.5% total cost structure typical of an actively managed fund combined with a 1% advisory fee amounts to over $1.2 million over 30 years at a 7% average return, according to M1 Finance's long-term fee analysis. 1.2 million. Not from a crash, not from a panic decision, from a slow, quiet, persistent extraction that never shows up as a line item on your brokerage statement. Here's the mechanics of why this is so different from a market loss. A market crash takes your balance down, but you still own the shares. When the market recovers historically, it has you recover with it. The compounding clock is paused, not destroyed. A fee, by contrast, runs whether the market goes up or down. You pay it on gains. You pay it on flat years. You pay it on losses. It's extracted from the fund's net asset value before you ever see the number, which means it's invisible to the emotional centers of your brain that track financial pain. Nobody has ever had a panic attack about a 0.8% expense ratio. But that ratio, over 30 years, on a mid-sized portfolio, costs more than the 2008 financial crisis cost the average investor who stayed in the market. The TD Wealth analysis on layered fees found something worth quoting directly. A portfolio that appears to charge 1% often costs 1.5 to 2% all in when advisory fees, fund expense ratios, transaction costs, and platform charges are stacked together. Most investors have never calculated their all-in cost. Not because they were deceived the information is disclosed in the fund prospectus, but because nobody told them to add it up, and the institution managing their money has a specific financial incentive not to make that calculation easy to find. According to data from NerdWallet, the average expense ratio for index funds is approximately 0.05 to 0.1%. The average for actively managed funds runs 0.5 to 1% or higher. If you are already in index funds, you've solved the most expensive hidden problem in retirement investing. The invisible scoreboard shows this. Most people looking at it would find themselves significantly further ahead than they expected. Now stay with me, because sign 4 connects all of this, and it's where the behavioral math gets genuinely strange. There's also something I need to tell you about when you're going to stop working that you probably haven't fully processed. Sign 4, you have actually calculated your retirement number, not sensed it, not estimated it, calculated it, the specific data-informed dollar figure at which your invested assets, in combination with whatever Social Security you're crediting yourself and any other income sources, can sustain your expected lifestyle without requiring a salary. Most people have a rough intuition about this. The Northwestern Mutual 2026 Planning and Progress Study found that Americans say they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably, up 200,000 from the previous year's study. But the same research makes clear that most people arrived at that number through feeling, not through math. The people who've done the actual math have confronted something the people running on feel haven't. Their timeline is not their choice. Here's the data. The EBRI and Greenwald Research 2025 Retirement Confidence Survey found that workers consistently report a median expected retirement age of 65. Retirees report they actually retired at a median age of 62, 3 years earlier, consistently across surveys. This isn't a rounding error, it's a systematic planning failure, and it goes deeper than just 3 years. The Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that 58% of retirees left the workforce sooner than planned. Of those, 46% left because of personal health issues or disability. 43% left due to employment reasons outside their control, layoffs, organizational changes, buyout packages that were really ultimatums with a deadline. Only 21% of early retirees did so because they chose to, because they were financially ready. That means 4 out of 5 people who retired early didn't plan to. They were delivered there by circumstance. Think about the 3 dates framework. Date 1 is your target retirement date, the number you put on a spreadsheet, the age you tell yourself you'll stop working. Date 2 is your probable exit date, what the statistics suggest will actually happen, which for a meaningful share of people is somewhere between 3 and 7 years earlier than date 1. Date 3 is your financial independence. Date the specific point at which your portfolio can sustain your lifestyle without a salary, whether you choose to retire or not. Most people are building toward date 1. The people in the top 10%, the ones who've done the math, are building toward date 3. Because if you've achieved date 3, dates 1 and 2 become irrelevant. A forced exit at 62 doesn't break your plan if your plan was built for 62. It breaks your plan if your plan assumed 67. The top 10% net worth threshold in the United States, according to a Visa analysis of 2024, Census Bureau data cited by CNBC, is roughly $1.8 million. That number grew from about 1.3 million in 2020, driven primarily by rising stock and home values. If you know your trajectory, your current savings rate, your realistic return assumptions, your timeline, and you know whether that trajectory gets you to date 3 by your probable exit date, you are navigating with a map. Most people are navigating by feel and calling it a plan. Time for a specific story, because the abstract version of these numbers lands differently when you can map it to an actual life. David is 45 years old. He's a marketing director in Columbus, Ohio. He earns $83,000 per year, roughly the US median household income. He has $310,000 split between a current employer, 401k, and a Roth IRA from a previous job. His combined savings rate, including a 4% employer match, is 13%. His money sits entirely in a Vanguard Target Date 2045 fund. Expense ratio, 0.15%. He has never made a penalty withdrawal, not in 2020, when the S&P 500 dropped 34% in 5 weeks. Not during the rate shock volatility of 2022. David feels behind. He reads financial content regularly, which means he has a steady diet of people talking about reaching financial independence in their 30s and the importance of getting to $1 million before 40. He compares himself to that and comes away feeling like he started the game 3 laps behind everyone else. Here is what the actual scoreboard says. The top 10% of retirement savers for his age cohort, roughly 40 to 50 years old, typically holds $400,000 to $600,000. According to wealth data aggregated from Federal Reserve and Fidelity sources. David at $310,000 is approaching, but not yet at the threshold, purely on balance. However, his 13% savings rate is above Vanguard's reported median contribution rate of 11.5%. His expense ratio is at the absolute lower end of what's available. He has never made an early withdrawal, which means his account has compounded without interruption through 2 significant market events in the last 5 years. And he has 20 years of compounding runway ahead of him before he hits 65. According to Gallup's April 2025 data, 63% of Americans aged 30 to 49 have a retirement savings account of any kind. That means 37% of his broad cohort have nothing at all. David is not in the bottom 37%. He is not in the median. His behavioral profile savings rate, 0 withdrawals, low fees, long time horizon, places him in the top behavioral quartile of American retirement savers, even if his current balance doesn't quite hit the top 10% threshold for his age yet. He doesn't feel that way. That is the invisible scoreboard problem, distilled to its purest form. The gap between the feeling and the data isn't a character flaw, it's a media architecture failure. The financial content ecosystem is structured to generate anxiety because anxiety drives engagement and engagement drives product sales. David's perfectly calibrated, boring setup index fund, consistent contributions, low fees, hands-off does not generate clicks. The person who's 300,000 behind and desperately shopping for a solution generates clicks. The platform rewards the anxious, not the competent. Check the actual scoreboard, David. I want to pause here for a beat of honest absurdity because the math has been dense and we've earned it. There is an entire industry of professionals who will tell you with complete sincerity that the reason your retirement is underperforming is that you haven't yet discovered their proprietary risk-adjusted portfolio rebalancing methodology. This methodology, which they will share with you for the low annual price of 1% of everything you own forever, consists primarily of broad diversification in index funds with a quarterly rebalance, which you can do at Fidelity in about 45 minutes for free. But they say with a lot of confidence, confidence is apparently worth the 1% sign 5. Your plan doesn't depend on Social Security being intact in its current form. This is the sign that separates good planners from great planners. And the data behind it is uncomfortable enough that most people quietly skip over it. The Social Security Trustees Report, not a think tank, not an advocacy group, the actual federal actuaries, shows that the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is on track to be depleted by 2033. If you're 51 years old right now, 2033 is when you turn 60, 2 years before you can even claim early Social Security. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, using separate analysis, projects that benefits could be reduced by 24% as early as late 2032. For a dual income couple retiring at the start of 2033, that's roughly an $18,100 annual reduction in expected benefits. And here is the current state of retiree reliance. 78% of retired Americans today rely on Social Security to pay necessary expenses, according to Bankrate's 2025 survey. Not as a supplement, as a structural necessity. That's the population that would be hit hardest by a 24% cut. On the other end, 19% of retired Americans say they are not reliant on Social Security at all. That 19% is almost entirely concentrated in the upper income and wealth quintiles, the people who built investment income, rental income, pension income, or some combination, specifically as an alternative to government dependency. There's a specific planning decision embedded in Sign 5 that most people haven't consciously made. When you're calculating your retirement number, are you modeling Social Security at 100% of projected benefit, at 75%, at 50%? Most people use 100% because the Social Security statement they receive shows a projected benefit. And there's no note attached that says, but the actuaries think there's a meaningful probability this gets cut in 7 years. If you're building as if Social Security is a partial credit, a bonus if it arrives intact, not a foundation, your plan has a buffer built in that the majority of plans do not. And if Social Security does arrive at its projected level, you've just given yourself additional runway. The downside of this conservatism is that you might retire a year or two later than if you'd banked on full benefits. The upside is that a policy change doesn't shatter your plan. The people in the top 10% who feel genuinely secure about retirement are almost universally in this category. They're not relying on a system that their own government's actuaries have flagged as structurally underfunded. They built the alternative first and treat Social Security as upside. Let me come back to Mark. Mark, mid-50s, $240,000, 12% savings rate, never rated his account, expense ratio under 0.2%, owns a house, anxious every month. The median retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64 is $185,000, according to the Federal Reserve. Mark has $240,000. He's above median for the next age cohort up, and he's still 5 to 10 years away from that cohort. The average baby boomer 401k balance at Fidelity is $249,300 a generation in or actively entering retirement. Mark is at approximately that level with a decade plus of compounding still ahead. When you factor in the roughly 40% of Americans his age who have no retirement savings account at all, Mark's relative position moves significantly above the average line. Mark also has home equity, which doesn't appear in retirement account figures, but absolutely counts toward net worth. His combined position, investable assets, equity, and behavioral profile likely puts him within striking range of the Visa analysis top 10% net worth threshold of roughly $1.8 million by the time he reaches his early 60s, depending on home value and remaining mortgage. The invisible scoreboard, if Mark bothered to look at it, shows him someone who built exactly the right system. The anxiety is a product of the wrong reference group. The system is real. 3 practical takeaways specific to everything we covered, not generic advice. First, stop benchmarking against financial media. Pull up the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances. Find your age cohort's actual median retirement savings, not the average, the median, and map yourself against that. The median American family retirement savings is $87,000. That is the actual midpoint of the actual distribution. Every time you feel behind, check the scoreboard before you check the highlight reel. Second, calculate your all-in fee before you touch anything else in your portfolio, not just the advisory fee. The advisory fee plus the fund expense ratios plus any platform or transaction charges. If the total is above 0.5% annually, you are paying a compounding tax on your future wealth that is likely larger in lifetime dollar terms than any single investment decision you've ever made. Index funds at 0.03 to 0.1% exist. They're widely available, and they historically outperform most actively managed alternatives over 30-year windows. Third, run the scenario where you exit the workforce at 62 rather than 67. Model it. Completely reduced contribution years, potentially reduced Social Security benefits, additional healthcare costs before Medicare. If that scenario breaks your plan, the plan has a structural vulnerability that you need to address before it becomes reality. 58% of retirees left the workforce earlier than planned. Build for that probability, not against it. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And the actual path to the top 10% was never about finding alpha or timing the market or understanding what a collateralized debt obligation is. It was an account, a low-cost fund, a hands-off policy, and the discipline to look at the real scoreboard instead of the one that was specifically designed to make you feel poor enough to buy something.